What is the difference between the condemned fear and faint-heartedness exhibited by the 12 spies in Numbers 13 and 14, and those in Deuteronomy chapter 20, also chapter 28 and verse 3 and verse 4? Well, we're very familiar with the report of the 10 spies. The record says that they came back and they told the Israelites that the land flowed with milk and honey just as God said it would, but the people in the land were strong. The cities were fortified, very large. The descendants of Eunuch were living there. I don't know why my computer is so slow this morning. They said, we're not able to go up against the people, for they're stronger than we are. The land devours its inhabitants. All the people in the land are of great stature. Again, they mention the giants, the descendants of Anak, that were living in the land. Well, the Israelites believed the report of the spies. We're told that they wept. They complained against Moses and Aaron, saying, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, if only we had died in this wilderness. They asked the question, why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? This computer's running like I am this morning, I tell you. They said it would have been better, or it would be better to go back to Egypt. Let's pick a leader and let's go back to Egypt. Only Caleb spoke up and said, do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land. It's obvious that the Israelites were afraid, and 10 of the 12 spies were afraid. Now, compare that background. This is ridiculous. With a couple of passages from Deuteronomy. Deuteronomy 20, verse 3 and 4. And he shall say to them, hear, O Israel, today you are on the verge of battle with your enemies. Do not let your heart faint, nor do not be afraid, and do not tremble or be terrified because of them. For the Lord your God is he who goes with you to fight for you against your enemies, to save you. Then in verse 8, the officers shall speak further to the people and say, what man is there who is fearful and faint-hearted? Let him go and return to his house, lest the heart of his brethren faint like his heart. Well, God told the Israelites that they were not to be afraid as far as taking the land was concerned. We've just read Deuteronomy 20, verse 3 and 4, and verse 8. This statement was repeated before they went out to battle against Og and the Canaanites. But then, here in Deuteronomy 20, verse 8, when instructions were given to the soldiers, Moses said that the fearful and the faint-hearted were to return home, lest they influence their brethren. So it looks like the fearfulness of the Israelites was condemned. Back in Numbers chapter 13 and 14, you'll recall that God punished them. They were to wander in the wilderness for 40 years because of their unbelief. But now, here in this passage, the fearful and faint-hearted soldiers are told to go back home. Well, I want you to notice something, and that is that this passage does not say that it was right to be afraid. Moses is just instructed to send the fearful soldiers back home, lest they influence their brethren. A reason is given for this instruction. And so I think this is an important thing to notice. It doesn't say that it was okay for these soldiers to be afraid. It just says, send the scaredy cats back home. And so that is my response to this particular question. God clearly told the Israelites not to be afraid as far as the conquest of the land was concerned. But so others would not be influenced by their fear, the fearful soldiers were told to go back home. Hope that is helpful. Well, our next question is this: would the Ethiopian eunuch have been allowed in the temple if he was a proselyte and a eunuch? Well, I think we're familiar with the story of the Ethiopian eunuch recorded for us in Acts chapter 8. I'm not going to take the time to go back and look at that passage, but there's some questions that need to be asked. And the first one is this: was he a Jew or a Gentile? And I think it's hard to know. Remember, the Jews had been scattered outside the land of Palestine. Only a remnant came back from Babylonian captivity. Now, when Luke describes this man as a man of Ethiopia, by the way, that's not modern Ethiopia. That is an area known as Nubia today. That phrase could suggest that he was not a Jew. But, on the other hand, presumably it would have been difficult for a Gentile to possess an Isaiah scroll. Remember, he was reading from a scroll of Isaiah. However, perhaps his high position enabled him to acquire an Isaiah scroll. So I don't know that it's a foregone conclusion that the eunuch was, well, no, wait a minute, I'm about to contradict myself. Forget what I was about, well, you don't know what I was about to say. So we will leave it there, all right? But then there's a second question, and that is, was he emasculated? And again, that's hard to know. The term eunuch normally referred to someone who had been castrated or emasculated, but it could refer to any high government official. In the Septuagint, in Genesis chapter 39 and verse 1, the term eunuch is applied to Potiphar. And you remember that Potiphar had a wife. So the term eunuch doesn't always refer to someone who has been emasculated. Having said that, since the phrase of great authority points to him being an official, then the term eunuch may very well be an indication that he had been emasculated. Here's what the Net Bible says in its notes on this passage. The term eunuch normally referred to a man who had been castrated, but this was not always the case. And they cite the case of Potiphar in Genesis 39, verse 1. Such castrated individuals were preferred as court officials in the East, although Judaism opposed the practice. The Mosaic Law excluded eunuchs from Israel, although God certainly accepted them. This individual was a high official since he was said to be in charge of all her treasury. He may or may not have been a eunuch physically. he appears to be the first fully Gentile convert to Christianity, since the Samaritans mentioned previously were regarded as half-breeds. I think he was probably emasculated. I think he was probably a Gentile. But you notice I used the word probably. The Old Testament taught that men with defects could not serve as priests under the Old Covenant. And a eunuch could not enter the assembly of the Lord, Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 1 and following. This man was probably a God-fearer, not a complete proselyte to Judaism, but a Gentile who worshiped the one true God. In Isaiah chapter 56, in what I think is a messianic passage, we're told that eunuchs would be given a place in God's house. Now to the question. Being unable to enter the assembly of the Lord would not necessarily mean that he would have been unable to enter the temple. If he is a Gentile, then those passages in Leviticus and Deuteronomy referring to Jews would not apply to him. There was a court of the Gentiles in the temple area. Notice that Luke tells us that the eunuch had gone to Jerusalem to worship. Well, I would ask, was he unable to do what he came to do? If he would have been unable to worship, why did he make the trip? Well, I guess someone could say, well, he didn't know, and he found out when he got there, but here's a diagram of Herod's, or a picture of Herod's temple, and this area out here was the court of the Gentiles. If he was a Gentile, then my guess is that he would have been able to enter that area of the temple precincts. If he was a Gentile, that's as far as he could go. There was a court for the women here, and then there was a court for Israel, and that's in this area here, and then the court for the priests. This is an interesting question, but really it's not very relevant to us today. It would be kind of like the question, did those who were baptized with John's baptism before Pentecost have to be rebaptized with Jesus' baptism? Sometimes brethren have spent hours discussing and debating this question about John's baptism. And really, it doesn't matter as far as we're concerned today. And so I think this question is a similar type of question. I haven't ignored it at all, and I want you to give me your questions, whatever they might be. Well, here's our third question. Is it sinful if a man chooses to be a stay-at-home dad while his wife works outside the home? We share a couple of passages that pertain to the role of men as it is outlined in the Bible. In 1 Timothy 5, verse 8, Paul said, if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially those of his own household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. And then we're very familiar with Paul's words in 2 Thessalonians 3 and verse 10. For even when we were with you, we commanded you this, if anyone will not work, neither shall he eat. And then 3 passages concerning the role of women that indicate that it is God's intention that women guide the household. Family affairs are the woman's primary sphere of operation, if I can say it that way. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 14, Paul says, therefore I desire that the younger widows marry, bear children, manage the house, give no opportunity to the adversary to speak reproachfully. And then in 1 Timothy 2 verse 15, nevertheless she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith, love, and holiness with self-control. I've had a question in the past about 1 Timothy 2:15. I understand this reference to childbearing to be synecdoche, a part for the whole, Paul's way of describing her domestic activities. I don't think he's saying at all that to be saved a woman has to bear children. I think he's mentioning childbearing as synecdoche, a part for the whole, pertaining to her domestic operations. In Titus chapter 2, Paul instructs older women to teach younger women to love their husbands, to love their children, to be discreet, chaste homemakers. And so, well, before I say what I was about to say, women worked outside the home. There's evidence of that. Ruth gleaned in the fields. The worthy woman was a business woman. She bought property and sold it. Remember, Lydia was a seller of purple. Priscilla helped her husband Aquila make tents. So I do not believe that it's sinful for a woman to work outside the home as long as she does not neglect her domestic responsibilities. The Bible picture is that the husband works and the wife manages the house. But circumstances might prevent this from happening. Due to sickness or accident. Maybe the man is unable to find work. In a conversation that I had with a brother in Christ down in Avon, Indiana, just recently, he said that he and his wife lived for a time out in Arizona and he couldn't find work. His wife found work. Well, they didn't stay out there very long, but they experienced that kind of situation. Well, I guess bottom line, we have to ask, is it sinful to voluntarily reverse these roles? That's really, I think, the question. And I don't know. I don't think I have enough information to say that it would be sinful. And so I think that's where I have to leave it, at least at this stage in my study and my consideration. Usually, ordinarily, the biblical picture is that the husband works and the wife manages the household, takes care of domestic responsibilities. I will say this, that there are many passages in the book of Proverbs that indicate that laziness is not approved by God. And so it certainly would be wrong for the wife to go out and earn the living and the husband to sit at home and do nothing, just lays around and be a no-count bum. Well, that would be wrong, without a doubt. Matthew chapter 5, verse 22, tells us that if anyone says to his brother, "Thou fool," he shall be in danger of the hell fire. The commentary that I read indicates the problem lies in your hatred for your brother, not in a, quote, magic word that you might say, do your studies affirm what the BKC, the Bible Knowledge Commentary, says. Maybe we ought to read Matthew 5:22. Jesus says, verse 21 and 22, "You have heard that it was said to those of old, 'You shall not murder,' and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. But I say to you that whoever is angry with his brother without a cause will be in danger of the judgment. And whoever says to his brother, 'Raka,' shall be in danger of the council, but whoever says, 'You fool,' shall be in danger of hell fire." Well, that seems pretty cut and dry. But then we notice in Matthew 23, verse 17 and verse 19, that Jesus said to the Pharisees, "Fools and blind." And so Jesus called the Pharisees fools. In his parable of the two builders in Matthew chapter 7, he talks about a foolish man who built his house on the sand. In the parable of the 10 virgins, Jesus talks about 5 foolish virgins who didn't bring enough oil for their lamp. And then the Apostle Paul says of the Gentiles, they became fools. This is the verb form of the word that Jesus uses in Matthew 5, verse 22. In 1 Corinthians 3, verse 18, Paul says, if any man wants to be wise, let him become a fool. He describes the apostles this way: we are fools for Christ's sake. Craig Blomberg, in his commentary on the Gospel of Matthew in the New American Commentary set, makes this observation. He says, as with the commands against anger, both of these prohibitions against the use of insulting names undoubtedly carried the implicit qualification of, quote, where unjustified, since Jesus himself uses the term in those passages when the label is accurate. So that was his conclusion. Since there were times when Jesus applied this term to certain individuals, there must be this implied qualification that the term is not to be used where or when it is unjustified. I think we can summarize kind of the argument that I'm presenting here this way. Jesus taught that those who say you fool will be in danger of hell fire. But then there were times when Jesus called people fools. And we know that Jesus didn't sin. So what do we make of all this? Well, it seems to me this prohibition must be qualified in some way. And it may be qualified by the attitude behind the statement. And so that is my response to that question. And we don't have time to get into the next question that I have in the queue. And so we will conclude at this point. Thank you. Obviously, and I've said this before, if you have follow-up questions or want to talk to me privately, I'm most happy to do that. If you enjoy the study, I need your questions, so keep them coming. Thank you.